After 45 years of breathing sawdust and shaping wood with my own two hands, I sold my custom furniture business for $18 million. I planned a small party at the home I built, dreaming of a quiet retirement spent fishing on the river and finally building the canoe I'd promised myself for decades. But just before I could give my retirement toast, I saw my daughter-in-law, Chloe, slip a powder into my wine when she thought no one was looking. In that moment of pure, cold-hearted betrayal, I didn't panic. I waited, and when the moment was right, I quietly switched my glass with her own father's claws. What happened just a few minutes later would expose a monster and change my family forever. Before we get into this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And hey, for fun, let me know in the comments what kind of wood is your favorite. I've always been partial to walnut. The pen felt alien in my hand. For nearly 50 years, the tools that shaped my life were extensions of my body: the heft of a mallet, the sharp bite of a chisel, the smooth glide of a handplane over a piece of raw maple. My hands were calloused, scarred, and strong maps of a life spent creating things of substance. This pen, a sleek black Mont Blanc that probably cost more than my first workbench, felt weightless and insignificant. Yet, with one simple signature, it was about to unmake my entire life's work. Across the polished mahogany table, a piece I noted with a craftsman's eye was a cheap veneer, not solid wood, sat a young man named Mr. Sterling. He was barely 30, with a sharp suit and the kind of easy confidence that comes from a life without splinters. He was the CEO of the luxury design conglomerate that was buying Vance Woodworks. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice respectful, "your signature is the last one we need. Your legacy is in good hands. We have no intention of changing the quality your name represents." Legacy. That word echoed in the vast, sterile boardroom, a room so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. My legacy wasn't a brand name to be slapped on mass-produced furniture. It was in the grain of every piece I'd ever built. It was in the scent of cedar shavings on a cool morning, the satisfaction of a perfectly cut dovetail joint, the look on a client's face when they saw their family's future dining table for the first time. I looked down at the contract. Page after page of dense legalese that my lawyer had assured me was ironclad, $18 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a distant star. It was freedom. It was security. It was the promise of a peaceful old age, a final reward for a lifetime of 12-hour days and sleepless nights worrying about payroll. I thought of my late wife, Sarah, and how she used to bring me coffee in the workshop, her smile the only light I needed. We started this in a dusty garage with a second-hand table saw and a dream. Now, here I was, in a glass tower in downtown Portland, ending it. My hand moved, the pen scratching against the thick paper. Arthur Vance. Just like that, it was done. Vance Woodworks was no longer mine. Mr. Sterling stood and extended his hand. His grip was firm, but soft. "Congratulations, Art. You've earned this." I appreciated him using my first name. It was a small gesture, but it felt genuine. He saw the man, not just the company. I nodded, the lump in my throat too big to speak around. I gathered my copy of the contracts, slid them into my old leather briefcase, one of the first things I bought when the business started turning a real profit, and walked out of that silent room without looking back. The elevator ride down was a blur. When the doors opened to the lobby, the afternoon sun streamed through the massive glass windows, and for the first time I felt it. A profound sense of release. The weight of 45 years lifted from my shoulders. I was 68 years old, and for the first time since I was a young man, I was truly free. My only plan was to enjoy it. I had no idea that back home, my own family was already making plans of their own for my money. The drive home was a blur of green. The towering Douglas firs that lined the winding road to my house seemed to stand taller, their color more vibrant, as if they were saluting the start of my new life. When I pulled into my gravel driveway, the familiar crunch of the tires felt like a welcome home. I didn't go inside the house right away. Instead, I walked to my workshop, the place where Vance Woodworks was truly born. The scent that hit me when I opened the door was my life's perfume, a rich mix of cedar, walnut, and linseed oil. This was my sanctuary. This was where I felt most myself. I ran my hand over the massive, worn surface of my workbench, its maple top scarred with the ghost marks of 1,000 projects. I was home. I was free. I imagined the beautiful, sleek canoe I would finally build in this very spot. That's when I heard the sound of another car pulling up the driveway, this one moving too fast. I turned and saw my son Leo's ostentatious silver BMW, a car I knew for a fact he couldn't really afford glinting in the sun. He and his wife Chloe got out. Leo was dressed in a tight-fitting polo shirt and slacks, looking more like a guy heading to the golf course than my son. Chloe was, as always, impeccable. She wore a crisp, white linen dress that seemed utterly out of place amongst the sawdust, her expensive-looking sunglasses hiding her eyes. I felt a small, hopeful flutter in my chest. They must have heard the news and rushed over to congratulate me. "Leo, Chloe, what a surprise," I said, walking out to meet them. "I was just about to call you. The deal is done." "We heard, Dad," Leo said, but his voice lacked the warmth I expected. He didn't smile. He glanced nervously at Chloe, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture so slight I almost missed it, but it was there, a silent command. "Well, come on in," I said, trying to brush off the strange feeling. "Let me grab a few beers from the house to celebrate." "Actually, Art, could we talk in here?" Chloe said, her voice smooth as sanded cherry wood. She gestured toward my workshop, and I watched her gaze sweep over the space, her expression unreadable but somehow dismissive. It felt less like a request, and more like she was choosing the location for a business meeting. We stepped back inside, the three of us standing in the center of the room. The air, which had felt so comforting moments before, was now thick with tension. Leo wouldn't meet my eyes, instead busying himself by inspecting a stack of raw lumber. Chloe was the one who broke the silence. "Leo has something he wants to discuss with you, Art. An opportunity." I looked at my son. "An opportunity? What is it, son?" Leo finally turned to face me, his posture stiff. "Dad, the timing of this sale it's perfect. It's a sign." He started pacing, his hands gesturing in a way that seemed rehearsed. "There's this incredible commercial real estate venture, a development just outside the city. The initial buy-in is significant, but the projections are astronomical. We're talking a 25% return in the first 18 months. It's a slam dunk." I stared at him, confused. This was the last thing I expected to talk about. "A real estate venture? Leo, you're in tech sales. What do you know about property development?" "It's not about what I know. It's about the team I'd be partnering with," he said quickly, the words tumbling out. "These guys are heavy hitters, but the window of opportunity is closing fast. They need liquid capital to secure the land, and they need it now." I could feel a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew where this was going, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it. Not today, not here. "And what does this have to do with me?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. This was it, the ambush. Leo stopped pacing and looked me straight in the eye for the first time. The hopeful boy I remembered was gone, replaced by a man with the desperate eyes of a gambler. "I need $3 million, Dad." The words hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the room. $3 million. He said it so simply, so transactionally, as if he were asking to borrow the car. He hadn't said congratulations. He hadn't asked how I felt. He hadn't given me a hug. He had come to my sanctuary, the birthplace of the very legacy he was now treating like a winning lottery ticket, and made a demand. The silence stretched on, broken only by the chirping of a bird outside. Chloe stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on a half-finished rocking chair I was making for a client's first grandchild. She ran her finger over the curved armrest, her touch devoid of any appreciation for the craft. "Think of it as the first investment of your retirement, Art," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "You'd be setting your son up for life. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" I looked from her cold, calculating face to my son's anxious one. I saw it all with sickening clarity. This wasn't Leo's idea, this was a performance, and Chloe was the director. He was her puppet, and I was the audience of one they had come to swindle. The joy and freedom I had felt just 10 minutes earlier evaporated, replaced by the hollow ache of betrayal. My life's work, 45 years of sweat and splinters and sacrifice, had been reduced to a dollar amount in their eyes, and they had already decided how they were going to spend it. I don't know how long I stood there after they left. The sound of their BMW's engine faded, leaving behind a silence in the workshop that felt heavier than before. The air, still holding the faint, expensive scent of Chloe's perfume, felt tainted. They were gone, but the cold void their demand had created remained. I sank onto my old wooden stool, the one I'd used for 40 years, its seat worn into a perfect contour from countless hours of labor. My hands, which could shape the hardest oak with precision and care, were trembling. I felt like a fool. I had been so wrapped up in the pride of my accomplishment, so naive in my vision of a peaceful retirement, that I never saw the predator circling its prey. And the predator was my own son. My gaze drifted around the workshop, my sanctuary that now felt like a mausoleum of my own failures. I looked at the tools hanging in their perfect order on the pegboard, the stacks of beautiful lumber waiting to be given life, the fine layer of sawdust that coated everything like a gentle snow. For decades, this place was my escape and my purpose. It was where I had built a business, a reputation, and what I thought was a future for my family. Now, all I could see were the ghosts of the time I had lost. The price of this business wasn't just in dollars, it was paid in moments. Tacked to a corkboard above my drafting table, buried under old invoices and sketches, was a faded photograph. I pulled it free, the corners soft with age. It was from 25 years ago. A younger version of me, looking exhausted but happy, with dark circles under my eyes but a genuine smile on my face. Standing beside me was Leo, all of 8 years old, with a gap-toothed grin and eyes full of pure, uncomplicated adoration. In his small hands he was proudly holding up a little wooden bird, a wren, that I had carved for him from a scrap of pine. I remembered that day. It was a Saturday, and I had been working on a massive commission, a dining set for a wealthy client. Leo had come into the workshop, his face glum, because I couldn't take him to the park. He'd asked if I could make him something. I'd stopped my work, brushed the sawdust from my hands, and in 30 minutes I'd carved that simple bird. The way his face lit up when I gave it to him, it was worth more than any commission. That look in his eyes was the reason I did it all. Where did that boy go? When did the light in his eyes get replaced by the cold, hard glint of avarice I'd seen today? I sank into the worn leather armchair in the corner of the shop, the photo trembling in my hand. The ghosts started whispering then. I saw all the moments I'd sacrificed on the altar of this business. The parent-teacher conferences I'd missed. The school plays I only heard about later. I remembered with a fresh, sharp pang of guilt the Pinewood Derby race I'd promised to help him with. He had been so excited, sketching out designs for his little wooden car. But a last-minute rush order had come in, and I'd had to work through the weekend. I gave him money to buy a pre-made kit from the store instead. He'd gone with his grandfather, and I never heard another word about it. At the time, I told myself it was necessary. The business was still fragile. Every dollar counted. I was building a foundation for him, for his future. A foundation of what, though? I had given him everything money could buy, but I had failed to teach him the value of things that money couldn't. I thought of Sarah, my wife, who we lost to cancer 15 years ago. In those final months, we talked a lot about Leo. "He's a good boy, Art," she had said, her voice weak but clear. "But he's never had to fight for anything. You fought all his battles for him. Promise me you'll teach him how to build something for himself, not just how to live in the house you built." I had promised her, and I had failed. I had kept solving his problems with money, a down payment for his first house, a check to cover a bad investment, a new car when the old one broke down. Every check I wrote was another brick in the wall that now stood between us. I hadn't been building a foundation for him. I had been building a pedestal, and Chloe had just helped him climb up on it to look down on me. I looked at the little wren in the photograph, so simple and humble. It was made with skill, patience, and love. It was everything I had tried to be, everything I had wanted to pass on. And my son, the man who stood in this workshop today, had looked at my life's work, at all the things I had created with these hands, and had seen nothing but a pile of cash to fund his next shortcut. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about the utter and complete repudiation of my entire life. He hadn't just demanded $3 million. He had looked at that little wooden bird and told me it was worthless. The sun had set, and the workshop was cast in long, deep shadows. I must have sat in that chair for hours, the old photograph of Leo and the wooden bird resting on my lap. The initial fiery sting of betrayal had cooled into a deep, heavy ache in my bones. I eventually retreated to the house, the silence of the rooms amplifying my own loneliness. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing little to warm the cold knot in my chest. I didn't want to think about the money. I didn't want to think about Chloe's condescending smile. I just kept seeing that little boy with the gap-toothed grin, and I couldn't reconcile him with the cold-eyed stranger who had stood before me today. The next morning, after a mostly sleepless night, I was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee and staring out at the mist rising from the fir trees. My retirement party was tomorrow night. The caterers were confirmed. The invitations had been sent weeks ago. The thought of celebrating anything felt like a cruel joke. I was considering calling the whole thing off when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the screen flashing with a name I didn't want to see, Leo. I ignored it. A minute later, it buzzed again. I let it go to voicemail. Then a text message appeared. Dad, please pick up. I need to talk to you. My finger hovered over the delete button. Every rational part of my brain told me to ignore it, to cut the cord, to protect myself. But the irrational part, the part that was a father, couldn't. With a heavy sigh, I called him back. He answered on the first ring. Dad? His voice was different. Yesterday it had been sharp, arrogant, and demanding. Today, it was soft, hesitant, almost boyish. It was the voice he used as a kid when he knew he'd done something wrong. I'm here, Leo, I said, my tone flat. Dad, I am so sorry about yesterday. The apology came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding it in his lungs. I was a complete jerk. There's no excuse for how I behaved. I was out of line, and I'm deeply ashamed. I was silent, gripping the edge of the counter. It was everything I had wanted to hear, but coming now, it sounded hollow, like a perfectly constructed piece of furniture made from particle board instead of solid oak. It looked right, but it had no substance. He took my silence as an invitation to continue. I was so excited for you, for the sale, and I get ahead of myself sometimes. I see these opportunities, and my mind starts racing. I handled it all wrong. The first thing I should have said was congratulations. I am so incredibly proud of what you've built, Dad. You're my hero. You always have been. My hero. The words were a knife twisting in an open wound. Heroes don't get ambushed in their own workshops by the people they saved. As he spoke, I could almost hear a faint, whisper-thin murmur in the background, like a television on low volume, or like someone whispering prompts from just out of range of the phone's microphone. Tell him you're proud. My suspicion sharpened. Is that right? I said, my voice still devoid of emotion. Yes, he insisted, a little too quickly. And Chloe feels terrible too. She thinks you hate us now. We were hoping we could still come to the party tomorrow night. To celebrate you, properly, this time. He paused, then played his trump card. Chloe's parents, Gary and Carol, they drove all the way in from Iowa specifically for this. They've been hearing about your success for years, and they were so excited to finally celebrate with you and our family. Gary and Carol, the retired school teachers. I'd met them a few times. They were simple, decent, kind-hearted people who still sent me a Christmas card every year. The idea of them being dragged into this mess, of them being used as a shield, was a masterful, cynical move. It was pure Chloe. It painted me into a corner. If I said no, I wasn't just rejecting my son. I was snubbing his sweet, innocent in-laws. A war was raging inside me. My mind was screaming, "It's a trap, don't you see? This is a performance." But my heart, that stupid, stubborn organ that still saw a gap-toothed boy holding a wooden bird, whispered, "What if it's not? What if he's really sorry? What if this is your one chance to fix this?" "We'll bring a gift," Leo added, his voice regaining some of its confidence. "No more talk about business or money, I promise. Just a family celebrating its patriarch." Patriarch. The word was so formal, so unlike Leo. It was a word Chloe would use. That decided it for me. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that this was a lie. But I also knew I had to see it through. I had to know what their endgame was. "All right, Leo," I said, my voice tired. "You can come. The party starts at 7. "Oh, thank you, Dad, thank you. It means the world to me, to us." The relief in his voice was palpable. "We won't let you down." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I stared out the window at the quiet forest, but I felt no peace. The hope I felt was fragile, a tiny, flickering candle flame. But the suspicion was a rising tide, cold and dark, and I knew, with a sinking feeling, that it was about to extinguish the flame for good. After hanging up with Leo, I felt like a ship without a rudder, adrift in a sea of confusion. The conversation had offered a sliver of hope, but my gut was churning with a deep, primal sense of wrongness. I needed an anchor. I needed someone who had seen it all, who knew me better than anyone, and who wouldn't sugarcoat the truth. I picked up the phone and dialed the only number I could. Sam Jacobs answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar gravelly rasp. Art, don't tell me you're already bored with retirement and want your old job back. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Sam and I had known each other for 50 years, ever since we were two young bucks with more ambition than sense, starting our workshops on opposite ends of the same dusty industrial park, me with wood, him with steel. He'd seen me at my best and my worst. He'd been the one to loan me $2,000 to buy my first industrial-grade lathe, a debt he refused to let me repay, claiming he'd make it back on interest by drinking my whiskey for the next 4 decades. Not exactly, you old goat, I said, the familiar banter a small comfort. I've got a situation here, Sam. I need to run it by you. I'm all ears, he said, the joking tone gone, replaced by the serious attention of a true friend. I walked him through it all, my voice low and steady as I recounted the events of the last 24 hours. I told him about the ambush in the workshop, the coldness of the $3 million demand. Then I told him about the phone call I'd just had, the sudden, dramatic apology, the perfectly chosen words, Leo's claim that I was his hero, and the strategic mention of Chloe's parents coming to the party. I even mentioned the faint whisper I thought I'd heard in the background. I laid all the pieces out on the table for him, needing a fresh set of eyes to see the pattern I was already sensing. Sam was quiet for a long time after I finished. I could hear the faint sound of him lighting his pipe, a habit he'd never managed to kick. Finally, he spoke. Well, he said, his voice rumbling with certainty. You can put a fine-looking veneer on a piece of cheap particle board, Art. It'll look like solid walnut from a distance. But the minute you put any real pressure on it, it splinters. That's what that apology was, a cheap veneer. Oh, the metaphor, so perfectly rooted in our shared world of craftsmanship, hit me with the force of a hammer. It was exactly what I'd been feeling, but couldn't articulate. So you don't believe it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Believe it? Art, a snake doesn't change its scales overnight. The boy didn't wake up this morning a new man. He woke up and got his script for the day from his wife. He took a puff from his pipe. This whole song and dance, the sweet talk, the in-laws, it's not about making things right. It's about making sure they still have access. They fired their first shot, and it missed. Now they're re-strategizing, coming at you from a different angle. They still want the money. They're just changing their tactics. Hearing my own fears spoken aloud by someone else was strangely calming. It wasn't just my grief or my anger making me paranoid. This was real. So what do I do, Sam? You do exactly what you've done, he said firmly. You let them come. You host your party, you hold your head high, and you celebrate your life's work with the people who actually give a damn. But you keep your eyes wide open. You watch them. And let me give you a piece of advice. Don't watch the boy. The boy's just the mouthpiece. You watch her, Chloe. She's the one writing the words. She's the one you need to worry about. He was right. I had been so focused on my broken relationship with my son that I had seen Chloe as a secondary player, an influence. But she wasn't just an influence, she was the architect. Okay, Sam, I said, a new sense of resolve hardening in my chest. The fog of my emotional conflict was beginning to clear. Okay, I'll watch her. Good, he grunted. Now stop worrying. Martha and I will be there tomorrow night at 7 on the dot. And I expect the good stuff, not that cheap swill you tried to pass off last Christmas. I managed a real smile for the first time that day. It's on the menu, my friend. Good. I've got your back, Art. Always have. We hung up, and I stood in my kitchen, the silence returning. But this time, it wasn't a lonely silence. It was the quiet focus of a craftsman measuring his wood before the first cut. Sam hadn't solved my problem, but he'd given me something more valuable, clarity. I knew now that I wasn't heading into a family celebration tomorrow night. I was walking onto a battlefield, and thanks to my old friend, I would be ready. The morning of the party, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. The sorrow and confusion had receded, replaced by the quiet determination of a craftsman with a difficult project ahead of him. The project, I knew, was not just hosting a party, it was defending the honor of my own life. If my home was to be the stage for a drama I didn't ask for, then I would be the one to set it. Every detail would be a testament to the values they had dismissed. Every choice would be a quiet act of defiance. I bypassed the caterer's standard white ceramic platters and went straight to my private collection. From a felt-lined cabinet, I pulled out the serving boards I'd crafted over the years, each one a memory. There was the long, elegant board made from a single piece of curly maple, its grain shimmering like a river. I remembered finding that piece of wood on a trip with Sarah up the coast, the two of us marveling at its hidden beauty. There was the heavy, dark walnut board with a live edge, its rustic feel a nod to the wild forest surrounding my home, and the small, intricate end-grain cutting board, a mosaic of a dozen different woods, a piece that had taken me a week to perfect. I polished each one with my homemade blend of beeswax and mineral oil, the familiar, clean scent filling my kitchen as the wood's deep, rich colors came to life under my hands. These were not just objects, they were chapters of my story. Tonight they would serve as my silent witnesses. Instead of ordering flowers, I took a pair of shears and walked through my garden. Sarah had planned this garden, and I had maintained it as a living tribute to her. I gathered sprays of lavender, stems of brilliant orange poppies, and cuttings from the wild blue hydrangeas that grew near the edge of the woods. I arranged them not in stuffy, formal vases, but in simple glass jars and stoneware pots I'd collected over the years. The arrangements were not perfect or symmetrical. They were wild and alive, a reflection of the untamed beauty of the Pacific Northwest. They were everything that Chloe, with her curated, artificial perfection, was not. The catering team arrived in the early afternoon, a flurry of professional efficiency. A young woman, the team lead, surveyed the setup on my deck, the handcrafted tables and chairs I'd built, the warm lighting I'd strung through the old cedar trees. "Mr. Vance," she said, her eyes wide with genuine appreciation, "your home is incredible. It's real." Her team moved with a quiet respect, their admiration for the space obvious. When she saw the serving boards I had laid out, she stopped. "Are you sure you want us to use these? They're works of art." "That's what they're for," I said with a smile. "Things of beauty should be used. They're meant to be part of life, not just looked at." The simple exchange bolstered my spirit. Here were strangers who could see the value in my work instantly, a value my own son seemed blind to. For the wine, I descended into my small, cool cellar. My gaze passed over expensive French Bordeaux and flashy Napa Cabernets, the kind of bottles Leo would have chosen to impress people. Instead, my hands settled on a dusty row of Pinot Noir from a small, local vineyard in the Willamette Valley. I knew the man who grew the grapes, a third-generation farmer with hands as calloused as my own. I knew the story of the difficult harvest that year, the struggle, and the eventual triumph. This wine wasn't about status, it was about place, persistence, and passion. It was the perfect vintage for this occasion. I brought up a dozen bottles and set them out to breathe. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long golden rays through the trees, I stood on my deck and surveyed the scene. The tables were set, the flowers were arranged, and the soft glow of the lanterns I'd hung began to push back against the approaching twilight. The air was still and smelled of pine and damp earth. My home didn't look like a party venue. It looked like an extension of my soul. I had channeled all my hurt, my anger, and my resolve into this preparation. I had created a fortress of authenticity. Let them come. Let them play their games and speak their scripted lines. They would be doing it in my world now, surrounded by the undeniable, tangible proof of a life well lived. I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. The craftsman was ready. The stage was set. The clock on the mantel chimed 7, its gentle tones seeming to signal the start of the evening's performance. I took a deep breath, straightened my shirt, and opened the front door to the cool evening air just as the first set of headlights appeared at the end of my driveway. As promised, it was Sam and his wife Martha. Sam lumbered up the steps, a bottle of what I knew was ridiculously expensive, scotch in his hand, and enveloped me in a gruff bear hug that smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. "Don't think this gets you off the hook for serving the good stuff," he grumbled into my shoulder, but his grip was tight with 50 years of friendship. Martha, a woman whose smile could melt a winter frost, kissed me on the cheek. "Oh, Art, the place looks beautiful," she said, her eyes taking in the glowing lanterns on the deck. "It feels so peaceful here." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. They were the first to arrive, my oldest friends, the foundational pillars of my chosen family. With them by my side, I felt steadier. Soon the driveway began to fill. The sounds of car doors and warm greetings replaced the quiet hum of the forest. My deck, which had been a solitary stage just moments before, came alive with the vibrant energy of people who genuinely cared for me. Frank, my accountant for 30 years, who'd seen me through lean times and celebrated every small success, clapped me on the back. "You magnificent bastard, you actually did it," he said, his face beaming. "I never thought you'd let go of that workshop." "Oh, he's just clearing it out to build that monstrosity of a canoe he's been talking about since we were 30, Sam chimed in, and a wave of easy laughter spread through the group. One of the most meaningful arrivals was Elena, a young woman I had taken on as an apprentice a decade ago. She had been a kid with a fiery passion for woodworking but no resources. Now she was the proud owner of a thriving downtown studio creating stunning modern furniture. She hugged me tightly. "I wouldn't have any of this without you, Art," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You taught me how to see the wood, not just cut it." Seeing her there, so successful and confident, was a better legacy than any dollar amount in a bank account. The conversations that filled the air were a rich tapestry of shared history. Stories were told of the early days, of the leaky roof on the first workshop, of the time a huge order of black walnut arrived, warped, and I'd had to work for 48 hours straight to salvage it. These people didn't just know of my success, they knew the cost of it. They respected the journey, not just the destination. They admired the calluses on my hands because they understood what had formed them. Not a single person mentioned the $18 million. They talked about my craft, my mentorship, my friendship. As the catering staff moved among the guests with trays of appetizers served on my handmade boards, I stood back for a moment, just observing. I saw Sam and Frank locked in a heated but friendly debate over politics. I saw Martha and Elena admiring the wildflower arrangements, deep in a conversation about gardening. I saw a circle of old friends laughing at a story, their faces illuminated by the soft, warm light of the lanterns. My home was filled with the most valuable thing a person could ever own: real, unconditional affection. This was my true wealth. This loyal circle was my real legacy. In that moment, surrounded by the murmur of happy voices and the clinking of glasses, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. This was what I had worked for. Not the money, not the freedom, but this. The feeling of being truly seen and valued by the people who mattered. It was a perfect, beautiful moment. And it was the last moment of peace I would feel that night. Because just then, through the crowd, I saw a pair of headlights sweep across the driveway, the familiar, aggressive silver of a BMW cutting through the twilight. They were here. I felt Sam's hand briefly squeeze my shoulder, a silent signal of support as I moved to greet the newcomers. The warmth of the party seemed to recede as they approached, the bubble of genuine affection pierced by their arrival. Leo got out of the car first, his movements stiff and uncertain. But then Chloe emerged from the passenger side, and it was as if a switch had been flipped. She radiated a confident, effortless charm, her smile bright and practiced. Trailing behind them were her parents, Gary and Carol Peterson, who looked exactly as I remembered them. Kind, a little overwhelmed, and genuinely happy to be there. "Art!" Chloe exclaimed, her voice pitched to carry just the right amount of warmth. She moved past her husband and gave me a light, airy hug that was all perfume and no substance. "The place looks absolutely breathtaking. You've created such a paradise here." "We are so proud of you, Dad," Leo added, stepping forward. He handed me a heavy, gift-wrapped box. Just a little something to mark the occasion. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and in them I saw not shame or remorse, but the nervous energy of an actor about to deliver a crucial line. Behind them, Gary stepped forward and shook my hand with the firm, honest grip of a man who had spent his life working with his hands in a different way, marking papers and tending a garden. "Arthur, congratulations, truly. Carol and I have been hearing about this day for years. It's an honor to be here to celebrate with you." His sincerity was a stark, painful contrast to the charade being performed by his own daughter. I accepted the gift with a polite nod. "Thank you, Leo, Chloe, and Gary. Carol, it's wonderful to see you. I'm so glad you could make the trip. Please, come in, get a drink." I led them onto the deck, and the change in the atmosphere was immediate. The easy flow of conversation hitched for a moment as my friends politely turned to acknowledge the new arrivals. I was acutely aware of every glance, every subtle shift in posture. To everyone else, they were my family, the guests of honor. To me, they were a Trojan horse, beautiful on the outside and filled with treachery within. Chloe's performance was nothing short of masterful. She was the perfect daughter-in-law. She moved through the crowd with an easy grace, introducing her parents with pride. She listened intently to Frank's long-winded story about the early days of my business, nodding in all the right places and laughing at the punchlines as if she'd heard them for the first time. She complimented Martha on her necklace and asked Elena intelligent, thoughtful questions about her furniture designs, positioning herself as a patron of the arts. She kept a hand on Leo's arm, a constant, subtle reminder of their unity, presenting them as a perfect, supportive couple. I watched her work the room, my expression a carefully constructed mask of fatherly pride. But inside, I was cold with a kind of clinical detachment. I saw every calculated move. I saw the way her eyes scanned the crowd, assessing, managing, ensuring her performance was being well received. When I introduced her to Sam, I saw the briefest flicker of something in her eyes as she met his steady, unsmiling gaze. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Chloe," Sam said, his voice flat. "Art's told me a lot about you." There was no warmth in his words, only a quiet, unnerving appraisal. Chloe's smile didn't falter, but I saw her hold his gaze for a second too long, a silent battle of wills passing between them before she smoothly turned away. "All good things, I hope." She trilled to the group at large, already moving on to her next target. Leo, for his part, played his role adequately. He stayed close to me, fetching me a glass of the Pinot Noir I had selected. "This is fantastic, Dad," he said, swirling the wine in his glass like a connoisseur. "You always did have the best taste." His praise felt like an echo from a life we no longer shared. He was saying the words, but the meaning had been hollowed out. The most painful part was watching Gary and Carol. They were so genuine, so blissfully unaware. Gary got into a passionate conversation with me about the challenges of growing heirloom tomatoes in the Oregon climate, his face alight with simple, honest enthusiasm. Carol told my friends stories about Chloe as a little girl, painting a picture of a brilliant, ambitious child. Listening to her, my heart ached for the parents who had no idea they had raised a monster. To the outside world, the picture was complete. The successful patriarch, surrounded by his loving son, his charming daughter-in-law, his adoring friends. We were the image of a happy, prosperous family. The illusion was perfect, but I could feel the lie of it all, a fine, invisible crack running through the entire evening. And I knew, as I watched Chloe laugh and charm her way through my loyal circle, that she was the one who held the hammer, and she was just waiting for the right moment to strike. The party had found its rhythm. Laughter and the warm buzz of conversation filled the evening air, and for a while, I could almost forget the ugly truth simmering beneath the surface. I was deep in a conversation with Elena and Frank, my glass of Pinot Noir resting on the railing of the deck beside me, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was Harold, my attorney, likely with a final detail about the transfer of funds. "Excuse me for a moment," I said to my friends, stepping away from the lively group. "I should take this." I walked through the open French doors into the quiet of my study, the sounds of the party instantly muffled. I left the doors slightly ajar, positioning myself by the large picture window that overlooked the entire deck. From here, I could see everything a silent observer, watching a play unfold on a beautifully lit stage. "Art, Harold here," his voice crackled through the phone. "Sorry to bother you during your celebration, but the buyer's bank had a quick question about the routing number for the final transfer on Monday. Just wanted to confirm the last 4 digits are 7,749. "Hello, Harold." "No bother at all," I said, my eyes scanning the party. I saw Sam watching Chloe with a hawk's intensity. I saw Leo laughing a little too loudly at a joke. I saw Gary and Carol chatting happily with my neighbors. Everything was normal. Yes, 7,749 is correct. Everything is in order. "Excellent, just a formality, they're eager to close." The CEO, Sterling, mentioned again how impressed he is with the business you've built. "That's good to hear, Harold," I said, my attention only half on his words. My gaze had drifted to the drink station, where a few guests were refreshing their glasses. Chloe had detached herself from a conversation and was moving towards the same area, her movements casual and unhurried. She seemed to be straightening the cocktail napkins, playing the part of the helpful daughter-in-law. My wine glass was still where I had left it, on the railing, slightly isolated from the other drinks. "So, we're all set for 9 a.m. Monday morning. Once you sign the final document I'm sending over, the wire transfer will be initiated," Harold continued, his voice a meaningless drone in my ear. Because I was watching Chloe. I was watching her as she casually glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes swept the deck, a quick, subtle check, no one was looking at her. The guests were all engaged in their own conversations. Her back was to the main crowd, but she hadn't accounted for me. She hadn't accounted for the man in the shadows, watching from behind the glass. My breath caught in my throat. Her hand, so elegant and steady, dipped into her small, impossibly expensive-looking clutch purse. When it emerged, she was expertly palming something tiny. For a split second, I couldn't make it out. Then, as she moved with a dancer's grace toward the deck railing, I saw it clearly. It was a small, clear vial, no bigger than my thumb, filled with a fine white powder. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the party fading into a distant roar. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a deafening drum. Harold was still talking on the phone, something about escrow, but his voice was a million miles away. My entire universe had shrunk to the space between Chloe's hand and my wine glass. With a final, furtive look around, she brought her hand over the glass. She unscrewed the tiny cap with her thumb and forefinger in one fluid, practiced motion, and she tipped the vial. I watched, frozen, as the white powder fell from the vial and disappeared into the dark, ruby-red wine. It was a silent, deadly snowfall. Quick, deliberate, unmistakable. "Art, are you still there?" Harold's voice cut through the fog. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my lungs paralyzed. Chloe, her task complete, casually picked up a cocktail stirrer from the table. She gave my wine a brief, gentle swirl, the motion as nonchalant as if she were adding a sugar cube to her tea. Then she slipped the empty vial and the stirrer back into her clutch, which snapped shut with a soft, final click. She turned around, her face a mask of perfect, pleasant innocence. She caught the eye of my neighbor Martha and laughed at something she said, her smile bright and genuine. No one had seen a thing. She had just, in the middle of a crowded party, tried to murder me, and she had done it with the casual ease of someone watering a plant. "Art?" Harold's voice was more insistent now. "Is everything all right?" My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles white. The full, horrific weight of it all crashed down on me. The demand for money, the faked apology, the performance. It wasn't a shakedown. It was Act 1. This was the end game. They weren't trying to get a piece of my legacy. They were trying to take it all. They wanted me dead. "Harold," I managed to say, my own voice sounding alien and distant. "I have to go. Something has just come up." I hung up the phone before he could reply. Through the window, I watched Chloe, my would-be killer, now animatedly telling a story to a rapt audience, a picture of charm and grace. My wine glass sat on the railing, a silent, poisoned chalice, waiting for me to return. The game had just changed. This was no longer about money. This was about survival. For a long second, I stood motionless in my study, the phone heavy and cold in my hand. The picture window in front of me no longer reflected the warm, happy scene of a party. It was a one-way mirror into the heart of a darkness I could never have imagined. The initial shock, that paralyzing, white-hot flash of horror, began to recede. It didn't fizzle out, it burned away, and what was left in its place was something hard and clear and cold as steel. All the grief I'd felt for my son, all the sorrow for the relationship we'd lost, it all vanished. You can only grieve for something that's lost. This was an extermination. It was a hostile takeover of my life, orchestrated by a smiling sociopath and enabled by the boy I had raised. The pain was still there, but it had been transmuted. It was no longer the soft, aching sadness of a father. It was the sharp, focused rage of a man under attack. In my workshop, when I find a flaw in a piece of wood, a hidden crack, a pocket of rot, I don't get sentimental. I don't mourn the beautiful board it could have been. I assess the flaw, I understand its nature, and I work around it, or I cut it out completely. The sentimentality was gone now. I saw the flaw in my family with absolute, chilling clarity, and I knew it had to be cut out. My first instinct was to throw open the doors, to scream, to point a finger, and expose her right there. My second was to call the police, but I dismissed both just as quickly. A chaotic scene would give her an out. She would play the victim, accuse me of being drunk or delusional. A police report with no proof? It would be her word against mine. The empty vial was hidden in her purse. The poison was dissolving invisibly in my wine. She had created the perfect crime, but she'd made one fatal error. She had allowed a witness, and that witness was not going to give her the satisfaction of a panicked reaction. She was expecting a victim. She was not expecting an opponent. My mind, which had been clouded with emotion for days, was now a whirlwind of ice-cold strategy. The craftsman took over. I wasn't just building furniture. I was building a trap, and I would use her own materials against her. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a truth that could never be unseen. I took one deep, steadying breath, then another. I smoothed the front of my shirt. I ran a hand through my hair, and I composed my features, forcing my lips into a relaxed, easy smile. The mask had to be perfect. I pushed the French doors open and stepped back out onto the deck. The wall of sound from the party hit me, the laughter and music now sounding jarring and surreal. It was like surfacing from the deep, silent ocean into a loud, chaotic world that had no idea of the monster swimming just beneath. "Everything okay, Art?" It was Martha, Sam's wife, her eyes full of genuine concern. She had likely seen the look on my face through the window before I'd had a chance to fix it. I gave her the warmest smile I could muster. "Never better, Martha. Just business. You know how it is, the final details." I patted her arm reassuringly. "All taken care of. Now, I believe I need to freshen up my drink." My voice was steady, my hand was not shaking. I moved through the crowd, nodding and smiling at my friends, a ghost at my own celebration. Every nerve in my body was on fire, but on the surface, I was the picture of a happy host. My eyes found Chloe. She was watching me. As I approached the deck railing where my glass waited, I saw a flicker of triumph, of eager anticipation in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a polite smile. I smiled back. It was a genuine smile this time, but it wasn't one of warmth. It was the grim, thin smile of a predator that has just spotted its prey. She thought she was in control. She thought the trap was set and her victim was walking right into it. She had no idea that I had seen the whole design, and I was about to turn her own wicked craftsmanship against her. The game was on. I moved toward my poisoned glass, the casual smile still fixed on my face. Every sense was heightened. I could feel Chloe's eyes on me from across the deck, a palpable weight of expectation. She was waiting for the final scene of her play, the moment the wealthy old fool toasts to his own demise. But I was no longer following her script. I was rewriting the ending. My glass of dark Pinot Noir sat on the wide, flat railing of the deck. Just a few feet away, on a small table cluttered with a few other abandoned glasses, sat another one, nearly identical. It belonged to Gary, Chloe's father. He was standing nearby, momentarily left out of a conversation, looking out into the darkening woods. He was the perfect cover, innocent, unsuspecting, and positioned exactly where I needed him to be. I didn't go for my glass. Instead, I ambled over to Gary, my movements relaxed and easy. "Gary," I began, my voice warm and conversational. "Carol was telling me you've won awards back in Iowa for your roses. I've been having a hell of a time with black spot on my climbers this year." His face instantly lit up, the way any man does when you ask about his passion. "Oh, don't get me started, Art. It's the humidity. The secret isn't in the spray, it's in the pruning. You have to open up the center of the plant, let the air move through." He began to gesture with his hands, demonstrating the technique, his kind face animated with enthusiasm. As he spoke, I nodded, listening intently, asking follow-up questions about rootstock and fertilizer. We were just two old guys, talking about gardening, but my mind was a machine of cold calculation. Out of the corner of my eye, I was mapping the geometry of the scene. Chloe's position, Sam's watchful gaze, the exact distance between the two glasses. The conversation was the anesthetic. The switch would be the surgery. "You see," Gary continued, stepping closer to the railing to illustrate his point, "you want to make your cut at a 45-degree angle, just above an outward-facing bud." So you're forcing the new growth away from the center of the plant?" I asked, mirroring his stance. My movement was completely natural, and it placed my body in the perfect position, momentarily shielding the two wine glasses from Chloe's direct line of sight. It was a window of maybe 3-4 seconds at most. I saw Sam's eyes narrow from across the deck. He knew something was about to happen. He subtly shifted his own position, drawing the attention of the person he was talking to, another tiny, brilliant piece of misdirection. Now, as Gary's left hand gestured passionately towards an imaginary rose bush, my right hand, the hand that had spent 50 years learning to be steady, silent, and precise, made its move. It was not a sudden grab. It was a fluid, economical motion, born of a lifetime of working in millimeters. My fingers brushed the cool glass of my poisoned wine. At the same time, my thumb and forefinger made contact with the stem of Gary's glass on the table just behind it. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation. In one single, silent ballet of movement, I slid my glass from the railing and placed it on the table where Gary's had been. And I lifted his glass from the table and placed it on the railing where mine had been. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. It was as clean and perfect as a mortise and tenon joint. A movement so smooth it was almost invisible. And that's how you guarantee good airflow for the whole season, Gary finished, completely oblivious. He hadn't seen a thing. That's brilliant, Gary. Absolutely brilliant. I'll have to try that next spring, I said, my voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I stepped back, leaving the scene as it was. The deed was done. The poisoned chalice now sat innocently on the small table, waiting for a victim who was not me. My own safe glass now sat on the railing, ready for a toast. I gave Gary a friendly pat on the shoulder and turned away, my eyes briefly meeting Sam's across the deck. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, so small that no one else would have ever noticed it. The trap was set. The bait was switched. I looked over at Chloe. She was smiling, sipping her own drink, the picture of patience. She thought she was watching a lamb walk to the slaughter. She had no idea she was watching a craftsman admire his own flawless, deadly work. The moment was here. With the cold, heavy weight of the safe wine glass in my hand, I moved to the center of the deck. I tapped a fork gently against the glass, the clear, ringing sound cutting through the warm murmur of conversation. A hush fell over the crowd. 40 pairs of eyes turned to me, their faces full of warmth and happy expectation. Across the deck, I saw Chloe's triumphant smile. She nudged Leo, her eyes shining. This was it, the culmination of her perfect plan. Friends, I began, my voice clear and strong, carrying across the deck. My dear friends, thank you all so much for being here. Looking out at your faces, I see my entire life. I see the people who stood by me when this business was just a crazy dream in a dusty garage. I see the people who offered a hand, not because they wanted something, but because that's what friends do. I raised my glass to them, my eyes meeting Sam's. To loyalty, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. I saw Gary, bless his heart, beaming with pride as he picked up his glass, my glass, from the small table beside him, ready to join in. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my own glass, savoring the rich taste of the Pinot Noir. I saw Chloe's eyes widen slightly, a flicker of hungry anticipation. She was waiting for me to falter, to clutch my chest, to collapse right here on the beautiful cedar deck I had built with my own hands. But I just smiled and lowered my glass. Tonight, I continued, my tone shifting, growing more serious. I've been thinking a lot about legacy. A craftsman learns that you can't rush things. A legacy isn't built overnight. It's built over a lifetime, with sweat and sacrifice and integrity. It's about creating something of substance, something that will last. I paused, letting my gaze drift from the faces of my friends until it landed, with pinpoint accuracy, on Chloe. But I've learned recently that not everyone sees it that way. Some people see a lifetime of hard work, not as something to be respected, but as a shortcut, an obstacle to be removed. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Frank, my accountant, frowned slightly. Leo shifted on his feet, looking nervously from me to his wife. Chloe's perfect smile was beginning to look strained, frozen on her face. She knew this speech had gone off script. They'll smile at your party, I went on, my voice dropping, becoming as cold and sharp as a chisel's edge. They'll offer praise and congratulations. They'll play the part of a loving family member so perfectly you'd almost believe it was real. But they see your life's work as nothing more than a treasure chest they feel entitled to. And they are willing to do anything to get the key. The silence on the deck was now absolute, thick and heavy. The only sound was the chirping of crickets in the dark woods beyond. Chloe's face had gone pale, the color draining from her cheeks. Her eyes darted around, no longer confident but like a trapped animal searching for an escape. In fact, I said, my voice rising with righteous fury, some people are so filled with greed, so completely empty of any human decency, that they would stand here, in the middle of a celebration, and slip a vial of poison into a man's wine, hoping to watch him die. A collective gasp went through the crowd. People recoiled, looking at their own glasses with suspicion. Leo stared at me, his mouth agape, his face a mask of utter confusion. Dad, what are you talking about? But I wasn't looking at Leo. My eyes were locked on Chloe, who was staring at my chest, her mind unable to process why I was still standing, still breathing. And then I turned my gaze to her father. Gary, who had been listening with a bewildered expression, was now raising his glass to his lips, perhaps out of nervous habit or a desire to break the tension. My voice boomed across the deck, a raw, primal roar of warning. Gary, stop. Don't drink that wine. Time seemed to shatter. Gary froze, the rim of the poisoned glass an inch from his lips, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. Every head snapped towards him. And in that instant of collective shock, Chloe moved. It wasn't a thought, it was a pure reptilian instinct for self-preservation. She lunged forward, not towards me, but towards her father. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, her movement a chaotic, clumsy stumble that was utterly theatrical. Her arm shot out, as if to steady herself. Her hand struck Gary's wrist with surgical precision. The wineglass flew from his grasp. For a moment, it seemed to hang in the air, a perfect, terrible jewel under the lantern light. Then it hit the cedar deck and exploded. Crystal shattered, dark red wine-poisoned wine splashed across the wood like blood. The evidence was gone, destroyed in a single, desperate, and devastatingly convenient accident. A deafening, horrified silence fell over the party. Chloe was kneeling on the deck, her white dress stained with the wine, making a show of dabbing at the mess, her shoulders shaking with fake sobs. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy, I just tripped. I'm so sorry." No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone had seen it. They had seen the lunge, they had seen the strike, and they understood. They had just witnessed a confession. I stood over her, my voice quiet now, but carrying more weight than any shout. I looked at the shattered glass glittering amongst the dark drops of poison, and I looked at the woman who had tried to kill me. "How convenient," I said. And in the dead silence, those two words were a judge's gavel, delivering a final, absolute verdict of guilty. My two words hung in the dead, cold air. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her white dress now grotesquely stained with the wine she had intended to be my death sentence. The mask of the charming, sophisticated wife had not just cracked, it had been pulverized, and the creature underneath was spitting with feral panic. "This is insane. He's crazy," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. She turned on me, her eyes burning with pure, undiluted hatred. "You've always hated me. You're just trying to turn my husband against me because you can't stand that he has his own life." Leo, pale and trembling, stepped forward. "Dad, there has to be a mistake. Chloe would never—" His voice trailed off, his words lacking any conviction. He was looking at his wife, at her wild eyes and hysterical denials, and then at my calm, steady gaze, and the terrible truth was dawning on him. He was a man caught in the wreckage of a life built on lies. "Get your things, Leo. We are leaving this madhouse," Chloe snarled, grabbing his arm with a claw-like grip. Sam took a deliberate step forward, his big frame a solid, immovable wall. "I think that's the first sensible thing you've said all night," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Get out of this man's house." There was no more argument. Chloe shot a final, venomous glare at me before practically dragging the shell-shocked Leo behind her. Their retreat was clumsy and ugly, a chaotic scramble through the crowd of horrified, silent guests who parted for them like they were a disease. We all listened as the BMW's engine roared to life, the tires squealing as they tore down the gravel driveway, a final, pathetic display of impotent rage disappearing into the night. They were gone. The poison was gone. But two people remained, frozen by the scene of the crime, their faces a landscape of absolute devastation. Gary and Carol Peterson stood by the shattered glass, looking like the sole survivors of a shipwreck. Carol was sobbing quietly into her hands, and Gary was staring at the dark stain on the deck, as if it were the grave of the daughter he thought he knew. Slowly, he looked up and met my eyes. The shame and horror in his expression were profound. "Arthur," he began, his voice cracking. "There are no words. I don't know what to say. We are so sorry." I walked over to them, past the stunned faces of my friends. I stood before this decent, heartbroken couple, and I felt no anger towards them, only a deep, shared sorrow. "Gary, Carol," I said, my voice gentle. "Look at me. This is not your fault." "We raised her," Carol whispered through her tears. "She came from us. This is our failure." "No," I said firmly, but with all the kindness I could muster. You raised a daughter. She chose to become this. Your character is your own, and hers is her own. I have only ever seen kindness and decency from the two of you. I reached out and placed a hand on Gary's shoulder. You are the victims here as much as I am. You have nothing to apologize for. You are welcome in my home, always. My words seemed to break the spell. Carol's quiet sobs turned into a wave of unrestrained grief, and Martha was instantly by her side, wrapping a comforting arm around her. Sam guided Gary to a chair, and my other friends, my loyal circle, formed a quiet, protective ring around us, their presence a silent promise of support. The party was over, of course, but no one left right away. They stayed, helping the shell-shocked catering staff to clear away the plates and glasses, their quiet, purposeful movements a way of restoring order to the chaos. They were helping me clean up the mess left by the rot I had just cut out of my life. An hour later, everyone had departed with quiet hugs and promises to call the next day. The only ones who remained were Sam, Martha, and the Petersons. We sat on the deck, the night now peaceful again, the only evidence of the night's horror, the dark stain on the cedar planks. Carol's tears had subsided, and Gary was staring up at the stars, his face etched with a weary sadness. There was no grand solution, no easy end to their pain. But as we sat there in the quiet fellowship of shared trauma, I realized something profound. The family I had lost, the one of blood and obligation, had been a phantom for years. But in its place, a new one was being forged right here on this deck, one built on loyalty, integrity, and the simple grace of good people showing up for each other in the dark. I looked out at the forest, at the silhouettes of the ancient firs against the starry sky. The air was clean and cool. The sawdust from a lifetime of work had finally been cleared away, and I could see my future with perfect, pristine clarity. It would be quiet, it would be peaceful, and it would be filled only with people who deserved to be there. I was finally, truly free.